Modern biology often treats life as a statistical anomaly. In this view, the universe is a passive, inert expanse of matter, and life is an accidental chemical reaction that happened to arrange itself into a self-replicating sequence. Philip Lillian's framework challenges this by positing that life is a lawful, mathematically bounded consequence of the geometry of space itself. This approach requires redefining the spatial substrate we inhabit. The framework introduces Finsler coherence hyperfractal phase space, or FCHP. It models space as a coherence-bearing, anisotropic, phase-regulated domain. This redefined space enables panspatial genesis. Life's generative conditions are intrinsic to space itself. This emblem maps the framework's core progression. Mathematics provides the structural constraints, physics governs their dynamical evolution, and biology represents their physical realization in living form. Under this model, biological life is derived logically from the foundational mathematical axioms of space, rather than arising as a departure from them. This flowchart maps the continuous metabiological program. The trajectory starts with FCHP's spatial substrate, triggering a genesis ladder where matter achieves self-maintaining organization. The latter half tracks how boundaries develop recursive layers through a control stack, resulting in cellular intelligence and conscious self-reference. To understand the origin of higher-order consciousness, we must first define the mathematical geometry of the space it occupies. The framework begins with four mathematical seed closure identities: 0 factorial, 0 to the power of 0, negative e to the power of I pi, and infinity to the power of 0. These identities serve as the primitive laws of identity, coherence, phase, and scale. Standard spatial models lack the features to support these four laws simultaneously. Euclidean space is root insufficient due to its inherent isotropy. It lacks an intrinsic directional bias, meaning it cannot encode the anisotropic closure costs required for a selective boundary. Purely Riemannian geometry is also limited in this context. While it models metric curvature, it lacks an intrinsic operator for primitive coherence. It describes relations, but does not dictate whether those relations form an organized, self-maintaining interior. Standard phase space remains a bookkeeping structure for dynamical states, while fixed-scale manifolds fail to account for intrinsic hyperfractal nesting, the requirement for structural layers to exist recursively across different orders of magnitude. FCHP is the minimal spatial structure capable of hosting all four seed requirements. It is an environment where spatial logic and physical dynamics overlap. FCHP possesses specific native properties. Finsler anisotropy provides inherent directional distinction, allowing a system to prioritize specific pathways. Primitive coherence allows organization to exist independent of mere physical proximity. Phase structure supports rhythmic relational exchange, enabling cyclical stabilization. Hyperfractal depth provides unbounded nested scales, allowing boundaries to form recursively. FCHP provides the spatial prerequisites necessary for a boundary to selectively harvest organization from its environment. In FCHP space, a boundary functions as a closure-selective interface. It actively regulates exchange with the exterior to preserve the coherence of the interior domain. This process is formalized in the universal boundary equation. It defines the dynamical balance governing the rate of change of a system's interior coherence. The first positive operator is boundary harvesting. This is the rate at which the boundary converts external gradients, such as thermal or chemical asymmetries, into internal structural order. The second positive operator is phase restoration. These are the cyclic internal processes that reinforce and stabilize the system's collected order. These are balanced by two negative operators. Dispersive loss represents the pressure of entropy and leakage, while structural degradation models the rapid collapse that occurs if the system's coherence drops below a critical threshold. This equation leads to the boundary gradient viability invariant. It is a dimensionless ratio that divides the system's supportive capacities by its total dispersive loss. The thresholds are precise. If the ratio falls below 1, dispersive loss dominates and the system collapses. At exactly 1, the system is metastable. A ratio greater than 1 allows the system to actively maintain and enhance its internal coherence. Mathematically, crossing this threshold constitutes the physical transition from passive matter to living organization. As a system persists, internal gradients force the creation of boundaries within boundaries. This process of recursive interiority allows single cellular layers to scale into complex, multi-layered organisms. As this hierarchy scales, genetic sequences alone become mathematically insufficient to coordinate form. Genes provide molecular components, but they do not dictate organism-wide geometry or tissue-level integration. To coordinate spatial form, the organism utilizes the developmental control stack. This is a nested hierarchy of regulatory processes coordinating local cellular states with whole organism constraints. The base layer is genetic possibility, providing the necessary molecular components but lacking spatial integration. Above that is the epigenetic layer, which translates and locks transient field signals into persistent cellular identities. The third layer is the bioelectric code. This spatially extended signaling network carries positional developmental fields across tissues. The highest tier is hologenetic control. This layer imposes global field constraints to preserve the body's target morphology, axis alignment, and proportional scaling. Causality in this stack is bidirectional. While genes provide bottom-up execution, the global hologenetic constraints provide top-down spatial guidance for epigenetic and cellular activity. The resulting biological form represents the stabilized geometry of a multi-scale field system, guided by closure dynamics across every level of the organism. This developmental stack is governed by the intrinsic geometry of FCHP. These spatial mathematics are expressed physically through three geometric operators of life. The first operator is chirality. In FCHP, mirrored pathways are not geometrically equivalent. Chirality provides orientation-sensitive asymmetry. Biologically, this maps to molecular handedness, asymmetric protein sorting, and the left-right patterning found in embryonic development. The second operator is torsion. This is the geometric expression of path-dependent phase transport. It drives helical organization and spiral growth dynamics in biological systems. The third operator is curvature. Here, curvature is the spatial trace of coherence density. It directs spatial gradient concentration and guides the folding and branching of complex tissues. Morphogenesis and regeneration are literal expressions of the foundational geometry of space mapping onto biological matter. This geometric scaling extends from physical form into decision-making systems. At the microscopic level, we find cellular intelligence, the capacity to interpret external gradients and adaptively filter them to maintain its own coherence. A passive interface blocks or transmits inputs based on fixed porosity. A living boundary alters its permeability based on signaling history, energetic demands, and repair priorities. This constitutes a state-dependent boundary decision. As single cells couple, their local intelligence coordinates into tissue-level agency. In this context, nervous systems function as rapid coherence amplifiers, integrating millions of microscopic boundary decisions into a single organism-wide response. Cognition is a higher-order, rapid integration of the same selective boundary logic, enabling basic cellular persistence. When an organism's integrative dynamics become sufficiently unified, it achieves conscious interiority. This occurs when the system recursively includes its own internal organization as an object activation. This final stage is governed by the meta-operator, the principle linking physics, biological form, and the conscious mind into a single action. The first half of the meta-operator is the observer function, the universal process of asymmetry selection, reducing open possibility into defined distinctions. The second half is the consciousness operator, the drive toward interior unification, stabilizing those distinctions into an organized state. Biological life forces the dynamic unity of these two operations. A system must differentiate its environment to survive and restore its internal coherence to persist. The transition from an initial spatial boundary to a fully conscious mind is a continuous, mathematically lawful scaling of coherence dynamics, built into space itself.